All right, welcome back. Thank you for joining me for part two of our seminar on digital health and cybersecurity for parents. I hope part one was informative and helpful for you as you are exploring these issues that we have to face as parents in the digital age. I hope I did a good job of summarizing your concerns and also introducing you to some additional concerns that I think we should also address. So there's a lot of ground we covered already, but in this second part, the second section of our seminar, we're going to dive into rethinking the core issues. We're going to take a deeper look at what's really going on, or what seems to be going on under the surface, a little deeper down, so that we don't just treat the symptoms of what we perceive as happening, treat the symptoms of the risks that our kids are facing online, but actually treat the core issues and get down to the deepest layer so we can build effective strategies on top of that. So I appreciate your attention as always. Thank you for being here. And let's go ahead and dive in. I'm going to switch my screen mode here so that you can see the full presentation without having to look at my mug. So stand by while I do that. All right, here we go. Let's dive in. Rethinking the issues with first principles. Let's take a look at what really matters. Okay, the digital expression of humanity. I want to start us off with this foundational understanding of the internet. The internet is a place where all of the expressions of humanity is made possible and made public and shared universally. So, what that means is anything that humans can think of in terms of expression, whether that's art or spoken word or videos or images or really anything that we can record digitally can be expressed onto the internet, good and bad. For the most part, the majority of the world does not follow the same worldview, the same set of values, the same set of principles. For the most part, in the modern era, there are, especially in the West, there is a growing indication that I think a lot of us would accept the premise that the value system that we grew up with is no longer the value system that dominates the world today and certainly the West. I don't think that's really disputed. You probably would accept that. I think some people refer to our current time or the time that is unfolding upon us now as sort of a post Christian era. What they mean by that, I think, is that Christian values and morals are waning in terms of overall influence. And the past few decades of moral relativism, where anything is true, your truth, my truth, has been flattened and compared and equalized across everything. So there's no longer any standard of values and standard expression of what is morally acceptable or not. I think we would all agree that that is kind of a good representation of the state of our culture in terms of core moral influence and worldview influence. And so what that means is whatever is expressed on the internet is going to be an outflowing of that. And the Bible did warn us about this. So I just want to capture that warning to, again, set precedent and help us understand the core issues of what we're dealing with. So I'm going to read to you from Romans chapter 1. It says, therefore, God gave them over in the sinful desires of their hearts to sexual impurity for the degrading of their bodies with one another. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshiped and served created things rather than the Creator, who is forever praised. Amen. It goes on to say they have become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. They are gossips, slanderers, God haters, insolent, arrogant, and boastful. They invent new ways of doing evil. They disobey their parents. They have no understanding, no fidelity, no love, and no mercy. Okay, now, of course, the author of Romans is speaking of those who are apart from God, those who are ruled by the spirit of the age, those who are ruled by the spirit of, let's say, humanity, absent of God, basically putting forward the premise that we can expect no good from those who are far from God. And so, if we are now living in an age, in a context where the value system of those who are expressing themselves in our culture are distancing themselves from God, this is what the Bible tells us we should be expecting to be an expression of that culture of those people. And so, if we are talking about our kids exploring and gaining access to the internet and encountering other people who are expressing themselves online, we need to remember that this is sort of the expectation that we should have. As we send our kids out into the world, this is what they're going to encounter. As we send our kids off into the internet, an internet that is generally unregulated and unguarded and unmanaged, this is the sort of thing that they're going to encounter is people who have been given over to complete wickedness and every type of sin and even inventing new ways of doing evil. This is kind of a foundational premise I think we need to capture and remind ourselves as parents, because as a first principle, I think we need to remember that the internet was not designed for kids. The internet is not fundamentally a safe place for kids. Now, there are services that can be delivered via the technology that makes up the internet, and that those services and products can be intended for kids. And that's not really what I'm speaking of. I'm not speaking of necessarily the things that are digitized and then delivered to us over the internet. I'm speaking of kids having access to the internet on demand, the ability to search and explore and access internet based content on their own in an unsupervised manner. That's kind of what I'm speaking to with this first principles. We need to remember that the internet, in terms of sending our kids or granting them access into that digital world, it's not a world that's meant for kids. It's not a world that's safe for kids. There's no rating that we can put on the internet to say this is how we're going to rate it. What do you give it? Is it an R? Is it an NC-17? Is it X? It is the place where any and every kind of evil can persist, can grow, and can be expressed. Content is not moderated. There's no master content moderator saying what's acceptable and what's not. There's no morality system that overlays content and services, websites. You can create a website for whatever you want. You can create a domain for whatever you want. You can start publishing whatever it is you want online, and with very few exceptions, there's basically no restriction and no moderation and no policing of any of that. Data and privacy are not protected, not even by providers that we trust. The data and privacy, in fact, this is a big problem with some of the big tech providers in the West, in Silicon Valley. They intentionally weaponize privacy and data. They intentionally take your data in a very deceiving way and compromise your privacy in a very deceptive way. And they turn that into profit for themselves. And not only that, but they turn it into a vehicle for manipulating you into generating profit for them. So even within our own sphere of influence in trusted community of Silicon Valley, US based tech providers, there should be no expectation that we are respected and valued as individuals according to the value system that you and I probably adhere to and hold dear. In addition to that, crime is generally not challenged. I mentioned this at the introduction video. The size and scale of the cybercrime world, it is vast and numerous. And generally speaking, there's no cooperation from one country to another to counter cybercrime. You will see from time to time announcements from the FBI and international law enforcement agencies talking about a particular cyber crime or a cyber gang or operation being taken down. Those are exceptions to the rule, and I think a lot of times those are mostly for publicity reasons, to show, or if particular adversaries have crossed some sort of threshold, to show the world that there are means to kind of warn the criminal underground that they could go after you. But in general, crime is just unchallenged and unchecked, except on a case by case basis, based on whomever is raising a ruckus about that. So, all this to say, we need to adopt this first principle that the internet and the people who are going to be expressing themselves on the internet probably do not share our value system. They probably, and there is an opportunity for anyone to express anything and publish it on the internet, and that our kids could come across. They could access it, whether it's intentional or unintentional. Whatever the case would be, they could be lured to a website. They could be tricked into clicking on a website. They could be searching for something else and stumble upon a website or content or person or whatever the case would be. And there's really no checks or balances on that natively. There are things that you can do, and we'll talk about that later on when we get to strategies. But what I want to talk about in terms of setting first principles and core priorities before we talk about strategies is resetting this in our minds. We need to reset the expectations around access to the internet and remind ourselves that the internet is not a safe place for kids. Okay, now I want to talk about the idea of the digital world. And I think this will make a lot of sense to you if I kind of walk you through a story. Um, and this speaks a lot to how the online radicalization sequence works. So I know I've got a lot on this slide. There's a lot going on, but I'm going to walk you through this. And again, we need to rethink what it means, what pattern and what function we're following when we invite our kids to participate online and to create their own digital experience. So think of it this way. When you give a kid a device or access to a device, whether it's a smartphone, a laptop, a tablet, whatever the case would be, It is functionally acting as a portal to access a different world, a digital world, right? It's like a gateway, it's like a door. When they pick up that device and they open up a web browser or install an app or launch an app, they are using that device as a means to access a digital space that is different from the physical space that they occupy. Now, there's strong overlap between the digital world and the physical world. I'm not saying that they're totally detached. In fact, that's part of the danger. The danger is the digital world certainly influences the physical world in a much more significant and serious manner than we realize. But I want to kind of walk you through this. So imagine, imagine a young lady in her home, and she has access to a device, and she picks up the device and she goes online. And let's say she goes to create a social media account because that's what her friends are doing. That's what she hears is the thing to do when you're a young lady in the modern age. You create a social media presence and an account. So she goes to her favorite social media provider or the one of interest to her, and she's prompted with a few things that she gets to enter. She gets to choose a name for her social media personification, her social media account. She can name her account whatever she wants. She can use her real name. She can use a fake name. She can use one that she just created up. She can use the name of someone who is already out there and impersonating them or just pivoting off of their name. Whatever the case would be, she has a chance to give herself a new name in this digital world. Now, those of you who have a biblical understanding of the significance of naming things, you know that identity and meaning is often what God conveys to things when he names them. This is what Adam was doing in the Garden of Eden. As he was naming animals, he was giving them identity and purpose and meaning and value. The same was true with God when he renamed Abram into Abraham. He was giving him a new identity and a new purpose. The same with Paul when he was renamed from Saul to Paul. Jesus was giving him a new identity and a new purpose, a new form of being and a new meaning of life. Well, this is fundamentally the same pattern that our kids are following when they are creating their social media accounts. They get to name themselves, give themselves a new name or this new being, this new personification that they're creating in the digital world. They get to name it. And that has significance. It's not just random characters, right? It's significant in what they choose to do. Do they choose to give it their real name and then potentially use that account as a fake personification, a dreamlike personification or representation of them, a doctored up and maked up, dressed up, a done up version of them that's not real? Or are they going to choose an alternate persona, a new figure that they're going to be in this digital world? Well, next they get to choose a representative picture, right? You create your social media account, you pick a name, and now you get to pick an image. And again, the image can be anything. It can be a real picture of you, it can be of a character, it can be of a piece of art, whatever you want. But again, the visual representation of how you want to name or be understood or personified in the digital world is the chance you have when you're creating your account. You get to create this visual representation of you, and it can be whatever you want. And that's going to be what people are going to see and associate with your account along with your name. They're going to understand your digital profile, your digital persona through this name and image. Now, what that effectively unlocks for them once they create their account with their name and their picture, now they have access to a whole new world. They have access to people through social media. They can make associations with friends. They can search for celebrities. They can search for accounts that they know. They can search for people around the entire world, which gives them access to an expanded community, an expanded number of potential friends and followers. And then those friends have friends, and they can be introduced to friends of friends of friends through these ever-growing circles of relationships online and connections, etc. So they have this now expanding, potentially global reach and exposure far beyond the possibility of anything that is available to them in the physical world. In the physical world, you are named by your parents, and you have the physical personification, the physical instantiation of you is created by God. How you look, what your general composure is, that is you, given to you by God, and the name that's given to you by your parents when you're born. Well, in this digital world, you can recreate yourself. And in the physical world, you have limits of your reach. You're raised into a family, you're born into a family, you're raised with a relatively small network of friends, people that you actually do life with and you partner with in life in various ways, school and church and clubs and sports and whatever the case would be. And you have family, extended family. That's kind of a limited scope of who you actually get to be known by and who you get to know and interact with in your world. We're in the online community, on the digital spaces. that community can be anything, and it's not really governable except initially on the social media space based on interest. But then that community expands. The social media platform is introducing you to new people that it thinks you should follow, and that expands your community. It's also narrowing the scope of your community and showing you posts and feeds based on what you express and how you engage in that digital world. So it's kind of creating a limited and a narrowed scope, but also an expanded scope of who you're going to interface with online. But all of this creates this alternate reality, this alternate person that you're operating by in this online world. You're disclosing limited things to the online world. You're disclosing certain things to the online world in certain ways to certain people, and they're interacting back with you, which gives you different emphasis and affirmation of certain things you express that people like and share and comment on. All of that means those are things that are going to encourage behaviors in you. You're going to continue to want to do those things and publish them online via your new persona in order to get people to continue to like you and continue to get that affirmation and support that we get from social media and social networks online. And then that's going to continue to curate how you use your online account and really how that digital personification of you continues to grow as a personality. Eventually, those things that you do online, the things that you talk about, the way you talk, your behaviors, your interests, the things you want to pursue, eventually that will shape who you are physically in the real world. The more time you spend acting as someone else and gaining affirmation for who that person is and the things that they do and say and like from spheres of community and influence and friends, the more you're naturally going to absorb those things into the real physical version of you. And that's what starts to trigger personal transformation, personal transformation where we start behaving like our online account, behaving like this alternate personality. And that's why you get to see in life around you people taking pictures for the gram or taking videos of themselves for their social media presence, or orchestrating, designing parts of their home so that they have a visual studio for the online world. They're transforming their real world self in order to play and act and play a role online. And eventually, if that role that they're playing online becomes popular enough and big enough and loved enough that meets their physical true self needs, that online persona can overwhelm and consume them and then transform them completely into something other than what they are. This is what we need to understand as the premise and the pattern of what's going on when our kids interact with the digital world through these created accounts that they get to manage and curate and interact with the greater world through. And this is the danger of radicalization. So this leads us to another first principle. We need to make sure that we are ourselves, and also teaching this to our kids, remaining grounded in the truth, remaining grounded in who our true identity is, who we really are, our name that we were given, the our body and what it really is, what it really looks like, the family context that we grow up in, our family name, the core values and belief system that our parents have taught us and have been reinforced in our community. We need to prioritize the real world interactions, real world friendships, real world living, the things that are real and not real. In the social media space, so often people are clamoring for attention that they're always creating fake experiences that they want to position to everyone else and say, look how great my life is. Look at all the amazing things that I'm doing. And that creates the false expectation that we should all be sharing in those same sorts of things. This is what creates despair and distance in teens. They see their friends doing all kinds of amazing and fun things. They recognize that they don't have access to the same things in their life, which either can create despair or it can create a desire to recreate those same sorts of things and pretend like they have things in life that they don't really have. So to counter that, we need to really prioritize and stay grounded in the real. I really appreciated this recommendation that I've seen. My wife actually lives by this principle, but I also have seen this online from others as well. I really appreciate this principle. Before going online each day, especially before going to the socials, one way to keep yourself grounded in the truth is to spend some time reading the Word, reading the Bible, or in prayer, or with other people in your life to ground yourself in truth before you venture into that other world. And then finally, I think it's really important as a first principle to make sure that whatever we're doing in that virtual world, the digital world, we do it in a way that is visible to people who know us in the real world, know our true self. And so they can keep us accountable. There's different ways you can do this. You can make sure that you always have friends on your online profile, or your kids have friends on their online profile, or you are following them in their online profiles, to make sure that they are held accountable to who they really are, and there's an opportunity for others to see them and correct who they are tending to want to be. I've shared this story in other videos about the concept of online radicalization and just the value of the family system around you and how that keeps you in check and balance. I remember, as you know, as a young teen growing up, venturing into and testing out different behaviors and even styles of clothes that I thought were interesting, were going to gain me, I don't know, association with certain musicians and certain trends. You know, when you get into a larger family context, perhaps with aunts and cousins and larger family that hasn't seen you for a while, and they see those dramatic shifts in you, they can tease you back into your value structure, back into your true family identity. And that's a good thing. Like those sorts of things keep us balanced and keep us grounded in the real, and they keep us from getting too untethered. So as another first principle, I think it's critically important remember that we need to keep ourselves grounded in the truth, and actively keep our kids grounded in the truth. Going back to our previous part one of this seminar, we talked about how something like 40% of the average teen's day is spent online. That means half their day is spent in this digital world, potentially portraying a character that is other than themselves. I just think about split personalities. They're literally potentially maintaining multiple versions of themselves on the internet, depending on how they're engaging and where are engaging for half of their day, and that's just crazy. Okay, another first principle I want to make sure that we understand. This is in addition to the premise that the internet is not safe for teens, for kids. We also need to make sure we remember that social media in particular is not safe for youth and for teens and for kids. I know that originally Facebook was made for college students, and so it was geared towards that college audience. And but even then, that's typically going to be adults, right? Those who are in college experiences are going to be adults. If you just go back to the premise of that original social media platform, it was not the original social media platform, but the biggest one originally. In the premise of that particular platform, it was originally designed for adults and for a kind of weird, nefarious purpose. Um, but my point here is the concept of going online and engaging socially with the world and the extreme personalities and content that we're going to be exposed to, and just the overall mental strength it requires, and rooting and grounding in truth and general maturity it requires to leverage social media appropriately and to not be taken away and radicalized by it. I think we have to recognize that it's really not a platform or a space that is safe for kids, for safe for our youth at all. So I think we should adopt the premise that social media is an adults only thing. You can't trust other personas you encounter in social media. They can all be spoofed and representing someone that they're not really. They can be accounts that have been taken over and are being operated by other people. It's just a general place that you can't trust. It is highly addictive, and it is an influential machine designed to radicalize us. And if we don't have the fortitude, strength, and maturity to keep ourselves grounded in the real, to spot when those tendencies are starting to play upon us and change us, then we can easily be quickly swept away. And so I think, as a first principle, again, remembering the temptation here, remember again, I should say, think again of like a lonely kid, or any kid who's struggling with attention and identity and loneliness and feeling like an outcast, which is what a lot of teens go through, right? A lot of us growing up, we're trying to find our place in the world. We're trying to discover our personality. We're trying to find value and affirmation from tears in the world around us. And in fact, we do this too as adults, right? Whenever you post something on social media, you hope that someone likes it. You hope that it will gain some attention, some affirmation, and someone will respond. And that makes you feel better, right? That's just kind of the nature of things. So if you think about how kids are experimenting with personality, experimenting with value, experimenting with identity in a larger world, if we suddenly thrust them into a context where they can create their own identity, they can create multiple identities, they can create them and destroy them at will, they can play with spheres of influence and other people's and attention and all that. And all of that can be influencing back on their real world self. I think it's pretty obvious to say this is just not a safe place for kids to be venturing in at all, as a foundational principle, and something we need to say no to just to get just out the start until we can figure out what is the proper way to guide them through the use of this technology and through the use of these platforms. Again, I mentioned in part one of this that there's a lot of data out there that shows how addictive these social media platforms are, how quickly kids can get addicted to them, and then how quickly they can be radicalized by all the things that they encounter through social media. So I think it's very dangerous for us to just opt in by default and to allow our kids to practice in the social media spaces. And again, going back to what the I would say wisdom of the world or the traditional digital health providers, the way that they guide parents how to solve this problem or address this problem is through content moderation. They don't say kids shouldn't have access to social media. What they say is you should monitor how your kids are using social media, look for signs of danger, and then intervene when they're doing things that are dangerous. I think that that's not good enough. I think as a first principle, we need to start with the premise that this platform, this technology is just not safe for youth and for our kids. Okay, next thing that I want to draw to your attention is this question. Thinking about how many kids are using digital devices and are engaged in online content in all the ways that they are, really raises an important question. Who is shepherding our kids? How did they get to this point where technology is so rampant and their addiction to the technology is so prolific? How did tech get into the hands of 95% of US teens? And how did they get access to social media accounts? And who's teaching them how to engage online? Who's teaching them what are the safe principles? What are the dangers and the risks of the online world? Who's protecting them from harm and providing them the access that they have and governing that access, both what they can get to and what can get to them? Who's teaching them core values about how to leverage the technology appropriately and make sure that we're using it as a tool for our benefit, not as something that governs and overtakes us, right? How do we keep them from inverting their world through technology, which is the tendency that we all encounter? How do we make sure that we're participating in that online world with our kids? If you think about a shepherd, when they're out with their flocks, they are in amongst their flocks. They know where their flock is going. They know what the sheep are doing or whatever animal that they're shepherding. They know what they're doing. They know the dangers that are around them. They're guiding them towards greener pastures. They're making sure that they're well cared for, provided for. They're correcting when they're falling into error or danger. They're going and rescuing them if they find themselves trapped in danger. So as I'm looking at these statistics of how kids have fallen prey to all these online threats and dangers by using technology, this question keeps coming up to my mind. Like who is causing this? Who is guiding our kids into this space and teaching them what is good and what is bad and protecting them and correcting them when they're wrong? And so I think this leads to another first principle. I think that we need to remember that we should not just go with the flow and give our kids over to this machine, this ecosystem of technology and content and platforms, et cetera, et cetera. I think we need to take an active role as shepherds, recognize that this is our role as shepherds for our kids, and recognize that there is no shepherd for them if we are not taking an active stance in that regard. I guarantee you, your schools are not doing this. Schools tend to err on the side of provisioning technology for kids. You know, every kid gets a Chromebook. They provision kids now with email addresses, with chat functionalities, with ways to submit their homework online. The goal in schools is to get kids connected. There was even programs recently all over the country that talked about the lack of internet access from home as being a cultural problem, a government problem that we needed to solve. They called it an equity problem, that people in the US didn't have access to the internet from home. And so there are government resources pouring into connecting homes of families, calling it digital poverty, in order to get people connected online. So they're not prioritizing protections for your kids. They're not governing access to resources. They're not teaching your kids the right way to engage online and the dangers and the risks that they're going to encounter as well. And so they're not properly shepherding our kids, which means we shouldn't just be giving our kids over to them and this ecosystem that is preying on them. I think we need to not opt in by default, just because culture and peers and everything around us says that we should do something and give our kids phones and get them access to social media and let them use kid friendly versions of social media. I think we need to do the opposite, opt out by default, and carefully lead our kids to the right way of using technology, to the right purposes, and via the right platforms. So don't just give in to convenience and what is efficient. I know this is a big tendency of parents, especially or I should say, a temptation of parents, especially when we're looking at technology like a smartphone. When we know we want to give our kids a communication device, it's convenient and efficient to just give them one of our old phones, or for us to upgrade to a newer, nicer phone and give them the old one. That's kind of a convenient and efficient thing to do. A single smartphone has lots of functionality, and so I know we feel like we're being more efficient by just using that one piece of technology to do many things. But all of this is just giving ourselves and giving our kids over to this machine, this ecosystem that is not healthy for them, is not designed for them, and in fact is creating great, great harm. And I think we also need to make sure that we don't assume that they are safe. We need to assume that they are not safe. We need to assume that when we send them to the internet, or grant them access to the internet, or give them technology, we need to assume that they are not safe and need to be protected by something. Because I tell you, even in the world of corporate security, which I worked in for professionally for over 25 years, even the biggest companies of the world don't take privacy and security seriously. They don't at all. And so there's this general assumption that the internet is safe, or the provided platforms are safe, or they're going to do all that they can to keep our kids safe, and that's just not true. And so I think the opposite of these things is we need to recognize our role and take an active role in shepherding our kids in their use of technology, in their journeying into the digital world online, and participate with them at whenever they are doing that. Whenever we authorize them to use the technology or to use the digital spaces, we're participating with them and doing it in an authorized and constructive way that is guided by us. This is a first principle that I think we need to adopt. Okay, I've talked about Dr. Ian McGilchrist a little bit already, but I want to highlight some work that he's doing. Very, very interesting. I strongly recommend you go take a look at his book and his writings. There's lots of videos available for him online to understand what he's trying to draw to our attention, which is exactly that, what we are paying attention to, and the value of attention itself. So, to quickly quote from Dr. Ian McGilchrist, I just want to pull 2 points out, and then I'll talk through kind of what I think he's trying to communicate to us and what we can learn from that. But he says here first, the role of attention toward one's object of concern governs what one finds. Okay, so just think about that as a foundational principle. What you pay attention to governs what you will find. How much you attend to a thing will govern what you discover and what you experience from it. In addition, he said that attention has the power to alter whatever it meets. Right. So whatever you engage in and are giving your attention to, you are influencing, and it is influencing you back and forth, which means attention is a moral act. Because when you attend to something, when you pay attention to something, you are both giving it life and authorization to influence you, but you are also influencing it. Meaning, whatever it is you're paying attention to is this dance between you giving it life and power to grow and be, but also you're giving it authority to influence you back and forth. So it is certainly a moral action, whatever we are choosing to pay attention to. In fact, we already know this because we talk about this all the time. We say that our most valuable commodity is time. What do your kids say all the time to you? Probably that they want you to pay attention to them. They want you to do something with them, because that's the most valuable thing you can do with them, is to pay attention, to listen to what they're saying, to get into whatever they're interested in and participate in it with. That's what we're fundamentally talking about when we talk about the value and the ethic of paying attention to a thing. Now, something else Dr. Ian McGilchrist is pointing out is this great misconception of the scientific world where we've decided that people are left-brained or right-brained. In his study of neuroscience and the brain, he's pointing out that in fact we are not. We are left and right-brained people. The two hemispheres of our brain play a complementary function with each other, and they need each other. And we need to exercise and operate under the full context of our brain in order to really understand the world around us. Dr. Ian McGilchrist is pointing out that the left side of our brain, left hemisphere, is really good at rapid identification, rapid processing of new things coming towards us, prioritization, quick ordering, and kind of getting a basic understanding and identification of whatever it is we are encountering. It's kind of a sorting and tagging process, if you will. So as we're being fed information, left side of our brain is kind of contextualizing it in a very simplified way to just basically understand what's going on, to identify it, and to make a quick decision. Do I need to pay attention to this or not? Is this a priority or not? Is this familiar or not? And to order things into a proper context so that they can be processed by our right brain, the right hemisphere of our brain, which is where our brain applies deeper thinking, deeper attention, contextualization, where we discern meaning and value and deeper understanding, where things are properly contextualized in their overall value system of understanding all things, big picture things. So these two hemispheres of our brain work together in order for us to process things in a normal and natural way. And right away, hopefully, you can see the danger here, as we talked about before in the first part of the seminar, with the nature of the feeds and the TikTok attention phenomenon, where we're constantly fed new things every 15 seconds, either whether it's a post or a reel or a quick video. We're engaging our left brain in that scrolling of the digital social media content, the scrolls and our feeds online. We're constantly engaging the left side of our brain. We're just quickly identifying things, listening to them, and making a quick decision. Do I like it? Do I don't? Do I not like it? Do I want to share it or not? Do I want to repost it or not? It's a very quick decision making process, and it's entirely left brain in nature. In order to engage our right brain to really truly understand meaning of whatever it is that we're encountering and to contextualize it in all of our life, we need to spend some time dwelling on it, thinking about it, and focusing and really paying attention to whatever it is. And we very rarely do that in social media world. Those of us who are disciplined and well practiced in this, mostly adults, who have some years under our belt, we might do this, but kids don't. And kids who are regularly engaged in their left brain life cycle, a few things are happening. One, they're never actually able to access and discern the true meaning and value of whatever it is that they're engaging in. And two, that's causing their brain, the right side of their brain, to atrophy. They're getting strong in the left side of their brain. They're training the left side of their brain, or they're training their brain at large, that left side processing, just quick identification, prioritization, and moving on and ordering is the priority thing that you should always be doing whenever you get new inputs. Like, make a rapid decision and move on, which is also preventing them from being able to again pay deep attention and discern what is really going on. And so that is fundamentally rewiring or reworking our brain. It's retraining our brains to ignore meaning, to not pay attention, and to lose the ability to pay attention. And so what this means is we are fundamentally transforming ourselves via the platform into meaningless beings, because what we pay attention to is transforming us, and we're paying attention to things without understanding their meaning. That is transforming us. And we're transforming ourselves into beings who can't even perceive meaning and value in larger context, even if we wanted to, because we're retraining and rewiring our brains overall. This is a big, big danger. I think Ian McGilchrist is spot on bringing this to our attention. And he's pointing out that the things that we really need to be paying attention to are the things that matter the most. And we need to be very careful about and diligent about what we do pay attention to. And so I'm going to borrow this phrase. This is actually, I'm lifting this out of a book by Jonathan Pajot, Rapunzel and the Evil Witch, I believe is the book, one part in his fairy tale series. But it's this idea of attending to your story. So that's one of the phrases in the book. I strongly recommend the book and the entire series for you and your kids. Check it out at Symbolic World Press. But this phrase, attend to your story, comes from the Rapunzel book. And I think it is a great encapsulation of what Dr. Ian McGilchrist is warning us about. We need to protect our attention. We need to really preserve what we decide to spend our time thinking about and engaged in and paying attention to, because again, going back to Dr. Ian McGilchrist, the object of our attention is going to govern what we find. And that is going to alter us and it's going to alter it, which means it is a moral action. If it's a moral action, then we need to be very diligent about how we engage in our attention. Else we will be doing it in an immoral thing. We'll be paying attention immorally, if you will. Second point here as a first principle is we need to manage our time and our focus. So paying attention to something very much relates to how much time we spend engaged in it and how much of our focus we decide to dedicate to it. I think we also need to be very careful about removing distractions, things that are going to try to capture our attention. And this is the internet's great at this. The internet is flooded with attention grabbers, ads and video content and autoplay content and images and sound bites, all of that. Those are all distractions that are designed to quickly capture our attention, get us to do something very, very fast, and then move on to something else. And these are all things that are destroying our ability to attend to things. And it's creating this kind of self-destruction cognitively, but it's also creating or causing us to act immorally. And so I think the counter principle to that, if we are going to be carefully guarding what we pay attention to, carefully managing our time and focus, paying attention to things, removing distractions, that means we need to really avoid the tendency to scroll and to react online. There's two parts to this: avoiding the tendency to scroll the feeds, right? And just quickly see what's new and make a quick decision on whatever it is, but also control our tendency to want to react. You don't have to like, you don't have to share, you don't have to participate, you don't have to comment. And doing that or feeling like you need to, or see how people commented or liked on your post, or whatever your whatever content you shared, that is also feeding into this overall ecosystem of an attention problem. And so I think attending to your story is part of one of these first principles. Really be careful about what you pay attention to and how you manage your attention. Okay, I mentioned before Jonathan Pajot. I've got more to say about him. Here's a copy of the book, at least a screen capture of the book that I just mentioned that phrase from: attend to your story. But Jonathan Pajot, he is an artist. He's a Christian artist. He's also a deep thinker, and does an excellent job of discovering deeper patterns in life and reality, and helping us see those patterns and relate them to core truth. And of course, he's talking about biblical truth when he does that. But he's also not hinting, he's also driving our attention to these problems in a very creative way, pointing out that the world isn't flat. I think one of the problems we have is, in recent years with moral relativism, we have flattened everything. We've said that everything is equivalent, that there is no overriding value system. And Jonathan Pajot is trying to remind us that there is a value system. There is a proper order of things. There is a true proper hierarchy of things, the way things that just work in the real world. And of course, as Christians, we know that comes from God. But regardless of whether or not you acknowledge God as the source of that hierarchy of values, it does exist. It is just a fundamental part of our reality, and you can't operate in a flat world because the world is not flat. It just doesn't work. And so people, objects, and places, they all have proper identity and purpose and meaning and value in that overall hierarchy of values, which again, we lose when we flatten things and think that everything is equal, or when we treat things all as equal. And actually, what ends up happening is we can invert our reality. We can make things upside down when we pay attention to the wrong things or look at the world through the wrong lens, and then either flatten things or have them in their proper order. And so in a recent interview, Jonathan Pajot was talking about this phenomenon and how it plays out with the smartphone. The smartphone is sort of an anti-hierarchy machine, is what he said in this interview, because it's a thing that can be used for anything. Through your one device, you can install an app for anything. This is often what the iOS and Android developers talk about. There's an app for anything. So in that one device, you can access anything online. You can use your web browser, you can message people, you can order pizza, you can social media, you can do anything through that one device. So that is kind of flattening out our world into a single plane that is accessed through that one machine. But in so doing, it is diminishing and reducing the value of all things as equals. Everything is just an app. Everything is accessible through my phone. And so that creates this kind of relative flat world by which we engage the things of the internet. And again, the online world very much affects the physical world. But we when we manage things through the online world first, we are inverting reality. We're going digital first to affect the physical. So that's already an inversion. But then when we say that everything is accessible through the digital, then we've inverted reality, and we're saying that everything that is accessible through the digital is going to control the physical. We're really operating upside down. But people they do recognize that there is a hierarchy of values, and they do treat their phone as the most important sacred thing, which is why, as Jonathan Pajot points out, people can't stop paying attention to it. This is why people get addicted to their phone and the content that's on their phone and the services that are on their phone, because they recognize that it has become the most important thing in their life. It is the thing that allows them to orchestrate all of life, to know who they are, to know what's happening around them, to manage all the things that are going on in life. And so this does represent an inversion of reality, a flattening of all things, putting all things under subject of this one device, and making all things accessible through this one device. It makes it the object of our attention and our desire. It makes it the top of the pyramid in terms of our priority and our hierarchy of values. And that's just fundamentally broken, because there is a proper order and hierarchy to things, but we need to manage it. We need to remember what it is, else we will have this chaos and this crisis of meaning and this crisis of identity. So I think it's really important to pay attention to again, this message that both Dr. Ian McGilchrist and Jonathan Pageau are pointing us to, which is this idea of paying attention and making sure that we're keeping things in the proper balance. We are recognizing things in their proper context. We are ordering things in terms of proper value. There's a right way to do things. There's a wrong way to do things. There's a right use for each object. There's a wrong use for each object. Everything has its identity and proper place in the real world. And it's really important that we maintain that hierarchy of understanding. Else, we will invert things, we'll turn the things upside down, and that will only lead to chaos and confusion because it's just not the way that the world works. We'll have chaos and continued confusion in this meaning and identity crisis. Okay, something else I want to point out to you is another thinker in this space. C.S. Lewis, author that I'm sure you're familiar with, but a book series you may not be familiar with. So, of course, C.S. Lewis is most famous. I shouldn't say most famous. He's very famous for the Chronicles of Narnia series, also Mere Christianity, Screw Tape Letters, and a number of other books that he's written that are very popular, especially within the church. But there's another book series that he wrote, which I think is equally significant to pretty much all of his writings, but pertinent to us today. And it's often called the Space Trilogy, but I prefer calling it the Ransom Trilogy. Ransom is one of the lead characters in these three books. But what C.S. Lewis does, if you read these three books, you'll find it. You'll find it. I'm going to use the word prophetic. It is as if he is writing stories that illustrate the exact situation that we found ourselves in today, both through these three books. You really do have to read them in order as a collection. But what he draws our attention to at the end in the book, That Hideous Strength, is we kind of have two options. We have the machine option, and we have our true value system option, the way that the world is supposed to work in a hierarchy of meaning and value in a family like context, but not just a family like context, the right family of context where each person has an identity. They have a role to play. They are an important member of a community and working together in that community in a real world context where identity and value and purpose is elevated and celebrated. That's the right way of organizing the world. And he contrasts that with sort of the bad guys world, which is flat. There's really no clear identity amongst the characters who are involved in the bad guys sphere. There's really no understanding of purpose. There's really no understanding of meaning. Everything's very vague. We don't really know what's going on. We don't really know where they're headed to. They are under the influence of some outside power system that's really controlling things, but it's all very confused and all viewed through one lens. It is very much a good allegory, maybe not allegory, a good representation of the world that we find ourselves in today with technology. So again, another person pointing us to the idea of affirming the value, the hierarchy of values, the importance of true identity, natural role and order of all things together is C.S. Lewis. And I strongly recommend you read these three books. Again, is foundational to how I think we need to understand the times and the context that we're in today in the digital age to help us craft our strategies and help remind us of what is most important and true. So all of this to say, from these three perspectives, another first principle we can derive is restoring purpose and meaning to everything. The idea of the sacred. Every object has its purpose, and it has a right use, and it has a wrong use and a mispurpose. So I think some of the things we need to do as a first principle of implementing this first principle is to avoid the nominalization of things, avoid aggregation and consolidation, because aggregation and consolidation, bringing many things under one umbrella, does tend to distill those things down. It does tend to force us to treat those things as equal or treat them as subjects of their higher order. And that can have a problematic effect, especially when we're talking about governing all of life through a smartphone, right? It's bringing all things under the governance of the smartphone device, or at least bringing it under all the management of the device, is a way to devaluate all the things, but also invert our reality. We're making the smartphone the highest thing, the most important thing of our life. And then that is the gateway by which we access and manage the rest of life. Another thing I think we need to avoid in restoring purpose and meaning to all things is the tendency towards efficiency and ease. And this is a big danger for all of us just as humans, right? We want to do the simplest thing, the fastest thing to get to the effect that we want. And we really need to be careful about that. The obviously the ramifications of that tendency are obvious. This is the crisis that we're in. It's because we just naturally go with the flow. We naturally do what's most efficient. We naturally do what's the easiest thing to do. instead of spending time in doing the right thing in a disciplined way, bringing to bear the right value system and going about things in an intentional manner, paying attention to what we're doing, thinking about what it is we're doing, and going through potentially a countercultural set of activities in order to maintain our sanity and overall health. So, some things that we can do: dedicate technology to its purpose and its meaning, and treat things as sacred. And this is not just technology, this is all things in life. But predominantly, when we're talking about technology, if there's something you want to do with technology, do that one thing. Find technology to do that thing for that purpose and that outcome, and try not to blur things together and blend things together, because that's when we come into this issue of normalization and taking our hierarchy of values and hierarchy of identities and crushing them down to some sort of normalized or flattened state. And my final point here: recognize what that hierarchy of values is. Define what your core values are, define what's most important, and examine that. Find out when you are putting things of value in places where they don't belong, and make sure you've got the right things ordered out. I think, again, if we think about parenting, we think about the idea of sending our kids off to the internet unshepherded, unguided, untrained. We would never do that in the real world, right? We would never send our kids to a foreign city without any preparation, guidance, supervision, any of that, right? We do that with our kids. Now, they do have obviously some preparation because they're raised in our homes with our value system. But then if we were just to set them free in the world before they're ready, unguarded and unprotected and unmanaged and unshepherded, that would just be setting them up for failure. And so that's what we do. We know that as a core value, right? So, okay, so let's apply that same core value to technology and make sure that we are treating things in the right order and the right place in that hierarchy of values. All right. Dr. John Vervaeke is another one who is speaking about this overall moment of time from a unique perspective. Excuse me, taking a sip of water there. You can't see me. But he's also speaking to this moment in time and trying to contextualize things for us and help us understand what's really going on and the depth of the issue that we're facing. So this is from Dr. John Vervaeke's website. I think this is a good description of the message he's trying to convey to us. So I'm going to read this to you. But it says, we are in the midst of a mental health crisis. There are increases in anxiety disorders, depression, despair. Suicide rates are going up in North America, parts of Europe, and other parts of the world. This mental health crisis is itself due to and engaged with crises in the environment and political system. Those, in turn, are enmeshed within a deeper cultural historical crisis that John Vervaeke calls the meaning crisis. It's more and more pervasive throughout our lives. I think he's nailing it here, right? This description of what he's calling the meaning crisis. It is a deeper issue that's embedded into our culture and into our moment in history as we are the current generation, and how we're using technology and how it has come to be and how it is integrated into our overall culture. It's more and more pervasive throughout our lives. I think this is obvious. We see this problem everywhere in life, and what he's describing as the problem obviously echoes a lot of the statistics that I shared with you in part one of this series. Further, the website says this: today, there is an increase of people feeling very disconnected from themselves, from each other, from the world, and from a viable and foreseeable future, which that all makes sense when we understand the deeper issues that are going on. People feel disconnected from themselves. Maybe that's because they're portraying an online persona that isn't really them. Maybe it's because they've created a digital version of themselves in the social media spaces that isn't really who they truly are. They've disconnected themselves from their family, from their friends, from their core true place of origin and their value system. And so they're finding themselves unable to relate to the world around them. And it's not just now, but they're also unable to relate to a foreseeable future. I think part of this speaks to what Dr. Ian McGilchrist is pointing out about how we can no longer attend to deeper meaning. We're no longer able to contextualize things in their deeper meaning and their deeper context, because we are training ourselves to treat things in a very quick and rapid decision making every 15 seconds, according to that TikTok phenomenon. So what John Vervaeke also points out is getting out of this problem is going to be tremendously difficult. I think because it's so embedded into the deeper layers of our current cultural situation. He says it's going to require significant transformation in our cognition, our culture, and our communities. This is a very pertinent description because, as I mentioned before, the effect of technology and social media use in particular is affecting our cognition. I provided you lots of statistics in the first part of the series that talked about that, how our cognitive capabilities are in decline because of the way the technology, the platform, the structure of the technology works, and the content in the online platforms that we're using the technology to engage. Of course, this is eroding our culture, and of course, this is making our communities more and more difficult to mesh together and find unity and find value, because again, we've lost that sense of being able to order things in their proper way in a larger hierarchy of value systems. And so this leads us to another first principle: value humans. I remember another interview I heard with Dr. John Vervaeke talking about his observation of young adults and teens today, about how he's noticing that there's a lot of great kids out there who are lonely and they're hungry for relationships, but they just don't know how to relate to each other anymore. They don't know how to make friendships. And so they're kind of totally dysfunctional relationally. And it's not just one or two kids. He's noticing it en masse, that kids these days who are growing up with 95% of them engaged online on a near constant basis in social media, they've lost the ability to be able to engage with one another and even build relationships, which again just furthers that meaning crisis. It further pushes them into despair because they are unable to connect. And so, as a first principle, I think we need to get back to this. We need to value humans and avoid outsourcing or replacing people with things, with technology. Just because you can use technology to do a thing, maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you should go find the expert to get the answer. Maybe you should go find the dictionary to look up the word. Don't just outsource or replace what people do and the value of humans because you can do it through a digital technology. Speaking of AI in particular, in this world of rapid AI expansion and usage, again, remember that 33% ish of teens say that they find a better friend in their AI companion than in real world peers and friends around them. So, part of this valuation of humans and making sure that we're elevating humans as valued properly is we need to avoid personifying AI. We need to not treat the technology as like us. We need to not treat it as a being, even though that's how it's being sold to us. I really hate this about XAI and Elon Musk, about how he's tempting us with creating visual representations of the chatbots and even naming them as different things, and alluring us and encouraging us to treat them as if they are this being. They're not, and we need to stop doing that, because when we treat the technology in the same manner as the way we treat humans, we are treating them as equals, and we shouldn't. We need to make sure that we are valuing humans higher than the technology, which means we also need to be very careful about managing what is influencing us, people and technology and the machines. And we need to prioritize doing as much as we possibly can in person with others, so that we avoid the temptation of isolation and further exasperating the problem of not being able to relate to each other. So, as a first principle, again, we're talking about core priorities and strategies before we get into the day-to-day technology. Value humans. Choose and find a way to value and elevate humans as we're going through this process. Okay, next, we're going to dive into attending to our story in a deeper way, how to recapture our focus and to rebuild order in a very intentional process. Okay, times have changed. We need to recognize this. Before the internet, pretty much all of life was conducted in the physical space in relatively small spheres of influence. You had your family life. You get gathered together for meals. You met together. This is how you knew who you are, who you were, where you belonged. We went into physical spaces to go shopping malls or strip malls or just point and sale stores. But that shopping experience required effort. It was a social experience. We could see and touch and feel and smell things in the store. The proprietors of the store could see and observe us and engage us and trying to get us to understand their products and make a sale. If we wanted to go have fun, we would do it as a group. Typically, we'd go play together outside as a group, ride bikes, go camping, whatever the case would be. We would do it as a group activity because we didn't have technology to distract us. Education was the same way. It was all in person. We didn't have the digitization of education and distant learning like we have today. Our faith value system were built in communities. We would go to places to celebrate our communal value and identity as a people and reinforce those value systems. And even our influencers, the rock stars and the movie stars that we looked up to and personified and celebrated, they were relatively few. They were disconnected from us, and they were kind of a stagnant role that wasn't necessarily engaging constantly and trying to feed the flurry of constant engagement that we have today. And so that was kind of before the internet. But of course, after the internet, everything moved from that physical world to the digital online space. Our communications, our banking systems, our media, our social engagements, shopping, scheduling, all those things I mentioned before, all of that got digitized and moved to the internet. And that smartphone or the laptop or the Chromebook became that central gateway. It's our way, our portal, that open door by which we can access now and orchestrate all the greater things of life that translate to our actual physical experience. And so when kids are given technology, the same thing is happening to them. They're accessing their wider world through that portal, through the internet, but we're if we give it to them too early without proper training and proper oversight and proper protections, that's when they're falling into these various traps. But think about this again, to reemphasize this point, anything that humans can think of, anyone that you could have reached within your natural sphere of influence, all those barriers are gone now with an internet connection. You now have the ability to influence, touch, and communicate with anyone in the world as long as they have an internet connection. And we do that via these virtual accounts and virtual personas that we build, which are literally parallel representations of our real world self in another world. All of that creates kind of this upside down, inverted vision of how the world actually works today. Everything is seen through our screen, everything is interacted with through our screen. And that screen now becomes the most important thing in all of our life. So, parents, we need to remember and reset this core value system and re-understand our role in all of this as we are raising kids. We are shepherds. We are shepherding hearts and minds. We are raising our kids. And so it is our responsibility and our honor to protect them from harm. We are also the ones that provide for them, which means any sort of access that they have is should be by our permission, by our provision, and under our administration. It also means that our responsibility is to teach them the values and skills by which we want them to understand who they are, how to relate to the world around them, and also how to use the technology in its appropriate way. And we also need to be in a position where we can stop and correct them to see when they're at risk, at harm, or doing things in the wrong way so that we can intervene and correct and protect them from further harm. This is really what the role that we need to remember as parents and recapture if we're going to guide ourselves and guide our kids into a more healthy value system. And so we can derive from that another first principle, which is we need to be not only parents and shepherds, but role models. We need to be very careful of what we draw, the attention that we draw our kids to, the things that we share with them, the things we talk about. We be very careful about what we are modeling to them is the right use of technology, the right way of interacting with the world, the right way with interacting with other people. Which means we also need to be very careful about not isolating ourselves from others and maintaining that constant connection with the real world and real life. We need to also reduce our use of technology. If we don't want them online for 40% of the day, then we can't be online for 40% of our day. And we also need to be very careful about managing our own focus and attention to role model that for them so they have a positive and affirming example of what it means to be using and existing in a healthy way in this digital age. So be the role model. Demonstrate the values and the behaviors that you expect your kids to emulate. Avoid drawing attention to adult things that should be off limits to them. Try not to draw their attention to memes and social media and to the new media. I'm not good at this. And this is something that I definitely struggle with, but this is something we need to make sure that we're doing. Limit our own screen time, build family time without devices. Make sure that your kids don't always see you with your nose in your phone, or else they will learn that that's the right way to be. Host family and social events and include your children into them. So don't create spaces where kids are off by themselves and adults are separated. Create whole family events and social gatherings so kids can interact with everyone in a real way and learn how to relate to each other at different levels of their life. Be very judicious and mindful when you're talking to other adults about real world events and cultural issues to avoid overstressing our kids with content and subjects that they're just not prepared for yet. We need to remember to, again, keep adult content for adults. And a lot of the issues I think we're seeing is kids are overexposed to themes online that they just don't need to be aware of yet. And finally, only introduce your children to what they need to know and be the one who introduces them. This again speaks to shepherding your kids through the value system that you already have. Shoot. Excuse me, shepherding your kids through the value system you already have so that they have what they need to know and to be able to grow in that and apply that to all of the things of greater life. Okay, now, attend to your story. This is two parts. Attend to your story and to their story. I think a very important part of shepherding our kids in the digital world is, again, keeping them rooted in core identity. If we're talking about one of the core premises of digital health is making sure our kids are safe and protected from radicalization and transformation via the things that they're exposed to online and the personalities they're exposed to online. The counter to that, of course, is making sure that we have a strong and core value system for them to find their identity in. A value system and a community that reinforces that value system helps them learn and discover how to live that out in the larger context of relationships and the world. And it also holds them accountable when they may stray from that in community and by a larger system of things. Again, remember back to when you were a kid. I grew up in the late 1900s in the US. You probably did too, or sometime near that. I think this is probably true of your experience. You had a relatively small sphere of influences in terms of how you did life and who you did life with. You had your core family identity, which is, your last name, the heritage of your grandparents and your great grandparents and cousins and aunts and uncles. It's something you celebrate and how you understand who you are originally. In fact, you bear the name of your family and you bear their image in your physical likeness, right? So there is continuity of being and identity just by the nature of our genetics, our DNA, but also the context in which we grew up in. But then from that, you had some sort of extended support system in your life. You had family friends, you had extended family, you had people involved with school or sports or other activities. They were engaged in you as sort of an extended support structure that also reinforced, for the most part, a common value system, or at least enabled you to live life in a structured manner that was pretty much all within reach, right? Your parents could access anyone who had significant influence over you, except for celebrities and rock stars, but they could access that kid who influenced you positively or negatively. They could access that teacher. They could access, someone at church or a coach or instructor or a teammate. Right. Our world of extended support was relatively small, and so that created an opportunity for us to have a system, a social system of engagement that reinforced that value and that identity premise, which originated in our core family, and then again in community beyond that, our faith system, our sports teams, whatever the case is, whatever your community is larger outside of your core family unit, is also enabling you to engage the world at increasing spheres of influence and increasing spheres away from your core identity in a way that still keeps all things balanced and reinforces core values and core truths. But always, always in this old world, at the end of the day, no matter what we did with our time each day, we would return back into our family, our core family structure, which reaffirmed and validated our family identity again. And so I think part of attending to our story and attending to the story of our kids is paying specific attention to these three categories of things. Make sure that we're really celebrating and and surrounding our kids with core identity in our family, our value system, our culture, our heritage, who we are, what we do, what we're all about, making sure that we're investing in extended family and friendships to surround our kids immediately with support, and then again to the larger community. But I think kind of some of the core things we want our kids to remember here is their identity is found first and foremost in their family, in that truth of who you are and where they came from. We also want to make sure that they know that they can be known and loved and love and learn how to love others through a supported community of real world interactions, and finally as part of a larger community that gets them to expose some strangers and some boundaries beyond just our core family context, but how to learn how to integrate those into the proper system of values and hierarchy overall that's going to keep them well grounded and keep them from straying away from influences or personalities or people or even technology that might cause them to stray. And so part of countering this online influence, countering this radicalization process is really building up home and identity and lineage and culture and purpose and all that. We want our kids to look inside of our families for this. We don't want them looking outside our family for where is their identity rooted, or what is their identity? What is their purpose in life? Where are they valued and what are they valued for? Where do they get affirmation and support and encouragement? And where do they find answers? We want to redirect all of that back into our sphere of influence and protection and shepherding. Remember, going back to our core role here, protection, provision, teaching, and correction. We want to be we want them to come to that pool of resources, our family, our extended support network, and our community in order to find these things rather than going to people and places and personalities in a digital world where they're just going to be subjecting themselves to improper identity, incorrect purpose, the wrong value system, the wrong way to get affirmation of the wrong things, and ultimately potentially the wrong answers. This is kind of part of recapturing what it means, I think, to shepherd our kids in this digital world. Okay, now a quick note about opting out. I know a lot of families that I encounter these days, young families in particular, are just choosing because of a lot of these dangers and are choosing knowing and taking seriously and knowing that there is an opportunity for them to shepherd their kids in a very intentional way in this digital era. They're choosing to just opt out of technology altogether. I did write a piece that I published to our Substack page and to members of Practice Security, where I kind of reflect on this and reflect on the pros and cons, potentially the value of opting out entirely, or potentially some things that you might miss out on by opting out. But there are a lot of parents I know that were just choosing, like, I know the dangers. I want to be very diligent about all this. And so I'm just going to say no to technology out the gate, to say no to participating with the cultural things and the online things as a way to just protect our kids from ever encountering these dangers in the first place. And I have to say, I can't think of a single criticism of that approach. It may not be necessary. I think you may be able to take advantage of technology and do some things that aren't necessarily deeply harmful. I think you can participate in the digital spaces and technology, etc., without fully opting out, but you do have to be very diligent about it. You do have to be very careful about what you pay attention to, what you elevate, how you order things, maintaining that proper hierarchy of values, etc., and shepherd and teach your kids through that entire process. Else you will potentially put them at risk of all these dangers and threats if you aren't very diligent about this. And so I think the opt-out answer for young parents and for young families is a viable one for sure. Um, but I think you are going to need to expand out of that over time. You are going to need to teach your kids how to incorporate into the digital age, into the digital era. At some point, it will become unavoidable for them. They will need to eventually create an email address and have a laptop, and they will need to be able to scan QR codes just to be able to function normally in our life. Unfortunately, I'm not saying that's the way I want it to be. I'm saying that's the way it is. And so I think at some point you are going to need to diligently guide your kids into this reality. But for now, especially at a younger age, I don't think the opt out option is a bad thing at all. I think it is a viable option for certainly for a lot. And that's kind of one of the challenges that we have, parents who kind of grew up in this age and have kids who grew up in this age and didn't realize these problems and we're only now learning these lessons. We have to correct. And that's a much more difficult thing to do than to start out with the premise of just saying, I'm going to opt out, not participate, and slowly introduce only when I have to. I think that's probably a wiser approach, and it's certainly one that you can adopt to your own, obviously to your own outcomes. But this returns us to another one of our first principles. I'm calling this build your ark. And I am invoking a bit of imagery of Noah's Ark intentionally. What I mean by this is establish your boundaries of protection, establish a place where your kids are protected. And that's not just a physical place, but it also needs to be digital boundaries as well. We need to make a place that is safe for our kids to grow up in, that is protected from the outside harms. We need to create an intentional place that roots them in their true identity, their true sense of belonging, their true context in hierarchy and order and all that. We do need to gather community around us that's going to enable us and support us in this endeavor, but also teach our kids how to integrate themselves into larger community and demonstrate larger value and potential to others. But all of this is in service to seeding the future. I think this is one of the big challenges that we have is in this age of transition. And for those of us who have kids who are participating in the digital age already, there's an opportunity for us right now to true things up, to pull things back, and to really focus on planting the seeds that are going to empower our kids to be healthy and well in the future, which is a big theme of the ark, right? Through the ark, Noah was preserving a culture, an identity, a place of belonging. He gathered together what was going to need to exist in a healthy way in the future. And then that, of course, seeded the future for the rest of us. So when we're talking about first principles and core values of protecting our kids online, think of it this way: we need to build an arc to protect, preserve, be a place of belonging and safety, and also a place that is going to, I should say, also operate in a model or in a mode that is going to seed the future, make sure our kids can launch into a future that is in a way that is going to be healthy and enable them to thrive. Okay, that's what I wanted to cover for you in terms of first principles and re-examining kind of the deeper issues that I think we're facing. It's not just surface level. And this is why in part one, I ended it by saying, I don't think any of the solutions that were being offered on the technology layer are going to be sufficient. There's a lot more we have to do beyond just the technology, as I think I've talked you through now. Hopefully, it makes sense. There's a lot more we have to do beyond and outside of the technology to establish the proper mode of being as parents, shepherding kids in the digital age, re examine what our core priorities are, re examine what's the proper and right way for us to be as adults and to shepherd our kids in this. And then it's from those first principles, from those priorities, we can then figure out how are we going to harness the things in life in an everyday kind of context. What decisions do we make? How do we use technology? What safeguards do we implement? What do we do? What do we not do? Next, we can examine all of those things, the essential safety and security things that we need to go do now that we have a stronger understanding of proper worldview and proper posture relative to this problem. So I hope that's been helpful for you. What we're going to do next is take another break, and we're going to dive into our next segment of essential safety and security strategies after the break. I hope this has been helpful for you, and we will continue on momentarily. Thank you very much.